Hi there, Ted Asregadoo here, your host of Planet LP. This is episode 111, and it is the last one of the spring season. I'm also recording this podcast after a series of traumatic events that have occurred in the United States and the world. And, well, I'm sure there's more to come, or so I fear. It's also Father's Day today, so a lot of mixed emotions going into recording this podcast. So, with that, you may be wondering why I'm bothering with a music podcast when it seems like dark days are here. Well, to be honest, I started this podcast during some dark times, a time when a pandemic shut down a good chunk of the world, and a time when the climate changed to such a dramatic degree, at least here in California, that it caused death through wildfires, people being displaced. And for a large chunk of Northern California, they were just buried in this smoke. Much of it was very toxic. So we were all kind of shut in. I felt like with so much darkness all around us, I wanted to dive into something that has given my life a lot of happiness, and that's music. Music, as made by humans, is pretty unique. We are the only inhabitants on planet Earth who can create and manipulate inanimate objects that make a variety of sounds. Other life forms on our big blue ball also make music, but we're the only ones who do so with instruments that we have created with our own hands. To quote Sting and the Police, when the world is running down, you make the best of what's still around. And music is still around. Music makes us feel less alone in the world. It makes us feel a whole host of emotions. And that's because music reminds us that humans, for all our faults, and yes, we have many, can be pretty amazing at times when it comes to creativity. Being creative with music means you need a solid foundation, and that foundation comes from a beat. So if you're a lover of music that comes out of that big bang that fused the blues and country and folk and gospel and R&B into rock and roll, you know the drummer is probably the most important element in a band, and usually the one who is the most overlooked. So just Google drummer jokes anytime, and you'll get some groaners, but you'll get some funny ones too. So here's one. Hey, did you hear about the drummer who finished high school? Me neither. Uh, here's another one. How many drummers does it take to change a light bulb? 5. 1 to screw the light bulb in, and 4 to talk about how much better Neil Peart could have done it. So with me on this final show of the spring 2025 season is John Young. He co-hosted Planet LP with me in 2021 during those dark times. And I think it seems fitting to have him on this episode. 1, because he's always so upbeat. And 2, he's also a drummer. So let's give the drummer some as we highlight some drummers who drum from the head and the heart. John Young, my friend, is here to entertain us. Hi, John. How are you?
I live for your musical introductions, my friend. It's been a while, Ted. It's always great. It's not been a while since we've seen each other, but it's been a while since we've casted together, if you will. And yes. I'm excited to be here. Yeah, I want to try to maintain that mood you talked about, which is so much going on that's so dark. Let's see if we can inject a little levity into folks' days today.
Yeah, levity and information/education about drumming. You've been a drummer for a long time. You've drummed in probably, I don't know how many bands, but I'm going to guess it's more than 2. And you've probably sat in with folks, and you've had to be the timekeeper. It's not an easy job. It's very physical. You're chopping a lot of wood with those sticks back there, and you are kind of keeping that band in time, so people don't stray off out of time and things fall apart. So you are the foundation of the band, and as that timekeeper, that foundation, you work mostly with like a bass player, I'm going to guess, that is also a foundation of the band. But we're going to talk about some of these drummers who have really laid down a groove. As I said, some are who drum from the heart, meaning that it's more like the feel of it, and then some who are more from the head. they really chart out every little bit. Like they know exactly where they're going to go with a particular drum rhythm. But for you, my friend, you told me that you are largely self taught as a drummer. So you drum mostly from the heart, right?
That's a good way to describe it. I did have a couple of formal drum lessons when I was in junior high school, when I really wanted to become a drummer and thought the only way to do it right is to, to actually get some real training from a real drummer. It was my music teacher. I was a trombone player at the time, but we had an old drum kit in the music room at Marco Forster Junior High School, an old Ludwig. I think they called it. It was like gray clamshell outer bodies, and it has some cool name that somebody can Google and look it up. But he would take me during lunch hours over there and just show me some basic maneuvers, if you will. So I learned the bossa nova beat early, which is kind of an off off beats on the bell of the ride cymbal while you're hitting the snare every other. But you know this because you play drums too, Ted. You
A little
understand this
bit.
stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you went beyond that, just the lessons. I stayed in the lessons. I don't think I've ever played, I maybe played live once and I was
Well,
horrible. But go ahead.
I, I wanted, I wanted so badly to be in a band that I was quick to take whatever shortcuts I needed to when it came to quality and precision to get myself into the right into an area where I would get noticed as a drummer. So I immediately sort of bought into the flash over substance vibe because I wanted to stand out. There, weirdly enough, a guy named Damon de Grignon, which is when I say de Grignon, I feel like I need to get somebody give me some hot tea. I've got de Grignon. Anyway, if he's listening, I apologize, Damon. He was the other drummer in our junior high school. The two of us had kind of a rivalry. And Damon was a pro who was playing drums sometime. He was like, 7 years old, and he was technically very good, but he wasn't very exciting to watch.
Hmm.
So my thought was early on, if I'm a little bit more Keith Moon like and a little less Buddy Rich like, although Buddy Rich was fun to watch too, but you get what I'm saying. I was trying to stand out. I immediately thought if I can sing and play, that's going to give me some other, a little boost above what other just timekeeper drummers were like. And I took that aesthetic and then dropped off of wanting to have lessons and taught myself enough to where I'm going to create now my persona, the John Young drummer persona, which is a little wild, a little crazy, definitely a 70s rock aesthetic. That's what I liked. That's what I listened to. Although I did love funk and I love James Brown and Earth, Wind and Fire. Um, that's how I got started. I got a little bit of lessons, but just to show you kids out there listening, if you don't take your lessons properly, eventually I tried out for the jazz band in high school thinking, well, I know enough to fake my way through an audition. And,
Mhm.
and the high school level band director's like, you know, you're enthusiastic, but you don't really have the chops I'm looking for, which meant I couldn't read music well. And I didn't have some of the, basic orchestrational skills that you needed to play in a bigger band like a high school band. So
Like
with
reading the
that,
charts and stuff. Is that what
yeah,
you like that?
right.
Yeah.
I lacked that among other things. Um, but ultimately, it didn't discourage me because I didn't really want to be in a high school orchestra. I wanted to be in a four-piece rock band with a bass guitarist, like you described, two other guitars, me singing along with the lead singer, and a Beatles or Stones based ideal of what a band was supposed to be like. And that's so that set me on my journey. And this is, we're talking about 1980 when I
Mm.
got my first kit. By this point, my parents had sort of thrown up their hands. They thought I was going to be a successful trombone player playing in the local Dixieland band. That was not going to happen. So they sort of begrudgingly allowed me to get a kit, build it up, rehearse when they weren't home. Just slowly developed the skills and the passion for it that I continues to this day.
And you said you were entranced by rock music, basically the four piece, right? The guitar, the bass, the drum, and maybe a rhythm guitar and the vocalist. So, and I'm sure you were very taken by these four lads. As you can see, one here. That's the drummer, as you can see him. Uh,
See,
the Beatles, and you were very much a fan of this band, even though by the time you were probably aware of their music, they had already broken up or
oh,
thereabouts. They were probably pretty close to breaking up.
oh yeah, yeah.
And so later in life, you became a Beatles fanatic. And the song that you chose to demonstrate, or at least to show why you think Ringo Starr's drumming is not only unique and tasteful and sometimes brilliant uh, as a timekeeper is this song, I Feel Fine. What is it about the song that you like?
There's so much to like about the song. Just as a song itself, it's well written. Sure, it's a 3-chord pop song with a great break, and it's got feedback in it, which is fun for anybody who loves that kind of stuff. But I am amazed by how difficult this particular drum part is to play. And I'm not the only one that thinks that. Sure, it's difficult for me because I'm not Neil Peart. But if you talk to and listen to drummers who have worked with Ringo, especially part of Ringo's all-star band where he's toured with a bunch of different drummers and musicians, to a person, they'll say, I Feel Fine is in a drum part league all by itself. The work he's doing on the ride cymbal, on the tom-toms, during what sounds like just a regular kind of a groove with John Lennon's, not George Harrison's, John Lennon's very particular little riff that Ringo is literally playing along with. It's almost like there's a third hand that's come out of nowhere to ring on the cymbals while he's doing the toms and the snares. It's deceptively amazing.
Yeah. It sounds a bit like a groove that I heard from Ray Charles. I think it might be what I say or what
What
I
I'd say, that's a great Ray Charles
yeah.
tune. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah,
So
Ted.
I have the isolated track from Ringo here, and I'll play a little piece of it, and you can comment away.
I get it. You want to do a little go-go dance to it, but if you listen to where every little trill on that tom has an opposite corresponding cymbal strike, it's not as simple as it sounds. And when you combine that with that riff that Lennon's doing, you've got sort of this magical little, like, it glues together better than you'd ever consider when you just say, oh, it's Ringo Starr, he's playing 4/4, whatever.
Yeah, no, it's a catchy little beat, and I never really noticed it on the song. I guess because of the guitar is so far forward on there, and of course
Right.
it's a catchy pop song. So I'm more listening to the lyrics and kind of grooving to
Right.
the guitar.
Like, it's a great song. Lennon sort of, is doing his thing, right, man? But if you listen to the guitar and the drums together, really try to focus on the two of them together. You almost like, is Paul McCartney even playing any bass? I'm not even paying attention because it's really it's a wedding of Ringo and John's rhythm guitar part that shows you Ringo wasn't just mailing it in. I mean, that had to have been thought out. That could have been played just as a 4/4 beat, and I don't know that anybody would have noted it because the guitar, like you said, is so forward. But I'm like, Ringo, there you go. You show him, brother. It's 1965. You're playing 3 drums that cost $400 total. Knock it out of the park, mister. I'm talking about.
I'm going to shuffle over to this guy, John Bonham, who drummed with Led Zeppelin for until he died. And before we started recording this, you mentioned, he was only 32 when he died, and I'm all like, he didn't look 32. He
Nope.
looked like he was like in his mid 40s and like had pretty much exhausted himself.
Yeah.
But yeah, the amount of alcohol this guy consumed will do that to you. So
Right.
died fairly young, but is an iconic drummer in his own right, mostly because he does have a lot of technical ability, but he also is I get the feeling he's kind of a drummer who drums from the heart and the head at times. He's got the ability, like you were talking about the song "Good Times, Bad Times." This is not the song I'm going to highlight, but you were talking about the bass drum work on there. That there's some triplets going on. That when that first Led Zeppelin album comes out and the way they mixed it, you can hear it pretty clearly. You're like, man, wow, that's pretty cool. That sounds awesome. How does he do that? You know?
Well, and having Bonham mic'd in the studio with one big overhead mic, one of the things he was famous for, because you described it so beautifully, he played from both the heart and the head. He was a technical guy who was also very emotionally driven, I think, and his drum work shows that. But he hit the drums so hard out of necessity because in the studio work he did prior to Led Zeppelin, even some of the Led Zeppelin work, it was like, well, we've got one microphone, man. So, we got to really need louder, man. Just crank it up. And so he had those giant, they called them trees, the drumsticks he used, or I think they were like 1Bs. I don't even you have to custom make these things. They were huge. And he hit the drums really, really hard. He broke a lot of drum heads because they called him a Neanderthal at the time, but then you hear some of the intricate stuff he does, and like, well, that's a Neanderthal with a bit of panache, if you ask me. And that stuff he could do with his ankle, I mean, as big a dude as he was, to have that level of flexibility is still kind of otherworldly when I listen to it. I still don't even get it, but magic.
I don't know if drummers like Ringo, did they even have click tracks that they would play to? I don't think so.
I think you were considered a great drummer because you could keep good time. And then if you were like a Keith Moon style drummer whose timing was kind of all over the place, well, you're doing so many riffs and so many rolls and so much cymbal stuff that it doesn't really matter if it's on time. I don't know. I don't care. What do you think, Keith? I don't know, man.
Yeah, the other guys had to kind of hold down the rhythm section in a way.
Good point. They had a great bass player too, so that helps.
But that was, I think Bonham is another one of those drummers. This is flash forwarding to when I was working at KKIQ, the sister station that you work for, KUIC, and we shared a traffic reporter in common, a guy named Todd James. And Todd was going on, and Todd's a drummer as well. He was going on and on about how he didn't think that Bonham was all that. And I'm all like, really? He goes, no, he's not all that, man. And so we got in a little bit of a back and forth over a little two-way before we had to go to traffic. But, we're talking about why he doesn't think Bonham's all that great. And I was like, dude, have you ever heard Fool in the Rain? Yeah. He's got this shuffle that he's doing. And
so pretty.
It's a really great song because it's actually drums. He drums in two parts. There's three sections of the song. The first part is the shuffle groove. And then they stop and they go into this kind of the samba section.
Yep.
And Bonham's got to try to give a samba feel underneath the piano. And I don't even know if Jimmy Page was there in that day, but there's all sorts of bells and whistles and things. And they're having fun because they're watching World Cup, and they're like into it. But if you listen to the isolated track, you hear Bonham doing kind of a rock samba feel. And then it just kind of explodes with a huge fill and then back into that shuffle groove. So here's some isolated drums from Bonham, particularly on the track that I just highlighted. So you see what I'm saying? It's got that shuffle feel to it, and then the samba feel, and then it's just right back into the shuffle after the middle section.
Well, the way he comes back into the rock section from that almost, it's like Brazilian, it's Rio de Janeiro vibe is a monster. The way he spins into it, and that's a very Bonham-esque vibe too. He does that on a lot of his fills. He spins into the snare and then goes over his toms. And remember, he had a setup where he had one big tom like Ringo Starr, but he had two floor toms. So even the way his style worked, he had to bring his arms all around to roll down the other side because he didn't have two toms on his bass drum. He had one big one, and then the two floors, and he had timpanis and he had other things. But that spin roll going into riffs is like classic Bonham. You just know it's a Bonham track when you hear that.
Yeah, and I think that what Bonham did on this song is he repurposed what they call the Bernard Purdie shuffle, and Bernard Purdie came up with this great shuffle beat that I'm just going to play it for you. So it's an isolated track, and here's him demonstrating it. So you can see and hear, mostly hear, what Bernard Purdie did. All credit to him. Purdie is the guy who comes up with this shuffle. It's been used and adapted in a couple of ways. Bonham using it on Fool in the Rain. Jeff Porcaro with Toto, he kind of did a hybrid version of that on Rosanna. So it's been used before, and it kind of gets back to that whole debate on whether, these white guys in rock basically just ripped off black folks and then, made a ton of money off of that and never gave credit. Yes and no. I mean, I kind of look at it like we all share this planet together. We are all communal in some ways, and we get
Mhm.
inspired by each other in many ways. Yes, there's some bad actors out there that will take credit, Led Zeppelin,
I
for
was just
ripping.
gonna say let's use that as an example because those guys were, not really quick to give credit where credit was due, right? Come on.
especially on that first album, right?
God, are you kidding me? Yeah, well, anyway.
And I think Page is probably still seething to this day that he's got to share credit with the writing credits on the music.
You didn't write "Whole Lotta Love," Jimmy. You didn't write it, okay? It's not your song, really. Come on.
So the Bernard Purdie Shuffle again, not Bonham, but Bonham did some great work with it. I thought that it's very powerful. It really worked to serve the song. It's one of my favorite Led Zeppelin songs, strangely enough. For some
Yeah.
people, would be like, "Well, don't you like?" And then they would reel off some kind of obscure album track or whatever. Sure, I like those things, but I don't know about you, John, but I'm getting the feeling you were probably a Led Zeppelin fan earlier than I was. I liked a lot of the songs, the ones that I knew, but was there something about that last album, In Through the Outdoor? And I guess it's because I had started high school that year.
Mhm.
The year that it came out, I was just going from ninth grade, junior high into my sophomore year, starting high school. So that album was all over the place on FM radio. So I heard "Fool in the Rain" a lot, and I thought, I really like this. This is Led Zeppelin. This is pretty cool. And then everyone was slagging Zeppelin on this record. Like, this isn't Zepp, man. What happened to them? These guys are a bunch of like they're like they've lost it. They're out of their prime. But I always thought that the song was unique. So
I think
I
there's a
still
couple of good In Through the Outdoor was given credit for like rescuing the record industry because in 1979 when it came out, it was a horrible time for albums and content, and this album came into the stores and people like you and me ran to buy it. Zeppelin fans. I think that album gets slagged appropriately for a few things. Robert Plant's voice is not in its greatest form on that record. If you hear some of the stuff he's doing, it's almost like we're Led Zeppelin. We're Kings of the Hill. We're not going to recut that. I'm not in the mood. I've got to get to Morocco. I've got things I've got to do. So it has a very. You pointed out how Jimmy Page is almost non-existent, and he's the face of the franchise, and he's not in a lot of stuff. John Paul Jones, the bass player and keyboard player, did all the arranging of some of those things, and it's keyboard heavy. Um, Interestingly, Bonham was nearly at the end of his life, but he's kind of playing, his chops are pretty good on that record. Whereas Jimmy's stuff, I mean, I love In the Evening, but you've got to get a translator to figure out what Plant is singing there. So it's kind of that album is a mixed bag. I did become a fan earlier because I loved early Jimmy Page. When I first heard the breakdown to Whole Lotta Love, I lost my mind. I'm like, well, this guy, I got to figure out what's going on here. This is not the Beatles. This isn't Keith Richards. And that was my gateway drug, was the second record. But I get what you're saying about In Through the Outdoor. It's part of the collection. It's got some good songs on it, but I know why it's been kind of slagged, although it's a great drum record.
Yeah, and then they got that Carusalembra, that 10-minute song that's mostly
Candles
synth heavy. What's that? That's what it sounds like, right? Carusalembra,
Whatever.
Carusalembra.
Hot
But
Dog
that
song. That's awful too. Yeah.
So back in like '06, and this is my last step sort of intersection here when we move on to another drummer. But back in '06, '07 ish, I bought a good kit, which I thought was a good mid-range kit. I had a practice space close to me that I could go to 24/7, and I started just going there and basically chopping wood and learning.
Yeah.
And I shared the space with a friend of mine who was a guitarist, so he had some PA, some speakers in there and everything, and he put a CD player in there, and I would put on uh, Carusalembra and In the Evening and just drum along to that because it's good. Like it does. I mean, there's some fills and things that you got to be mindful of, but because Bonham is so in the pocket and such a metronome that it was good practice to just drum along to his drumming. And I really liked Carusalembra because it has like maybe three or four sections, and
Mhm.
there's this middle part where it kind of slows down a bit, and then it gets to like this sort of weird new wavy thing. It almost sounds like M and pop music, you know?
Yes, yes, I agree.
But
It's a weird song.
the drumming changes slightly in style, and he's a little bit more angular and less loose. So I felt like it was a good way to kind of get my chops up by playing this long song that had three different styles of drumming. One was very aggressive at the beginning, then it kind of like slowed down a little bit, let you catch your breath, so you could kind of keep time at a slower pace, and then you go into a slightly different stylistic feel, and then you had to drum more like you were in, in the new wave. But
Yes.
it was very helpful. Yeah.
Yep, all good points. Again, it's a funky way that album is if you look at it and break it down like we're doing right now, it's really a great drum record, weirdly. And it's a great bass and keyboard record. But other than that, the two principals, Plant and Page, well, you checked out, you two. Come on.
Well, talking about a good drum record, or at least a good drum song, we're going to go to this cat. Did you see what I did? This cat.
You are can I just do this one? Can I just try that? Okay, that's good stuff, Ted. That's good stuff. Quality stuff.
If you're watching this on YouTube, you just see a picture behind me of Peter Criss in his full cat makeup. If you're just
Yes.
listening to the audio, you might think I've gone insane. So let's talk about Peter Criss. This
Yeah.
is a drummer that has meant a lot to you because you are a number one Kiss fan, the biggest Kiss fan I know. So take it away. This guy is your guy. He was an inspiration for you.
Well, I appreciate that, and I would like to qualify that by saying I think my Kiss fandom has certainly leveled off, as has yours over the years. But the initial, I think we talked about the first time you and I both saw either the poster for Alive one in a record store. I saw it down in Southern California. You were somewhere in the Bay Area. And the minute I saw them in makeup with flash pots on either side of the stage, and Peter Criss's what at the time seemed to me like the biggest drum set I'd ever seen, and it was one of the bigger ones of the 70s, with the cat makeup on and explosions. And then I listened to the live album, and I didn't know at the time that they were, piecing that together from 25 different shows and that some of it wasn't really live. All I heard was a thunderous, booming, great, literally blues-based rock, but dudes in makeup with explosions and a drum set that went for miles. I thought, okay. And he's also singing, by the way. Peter Criss did a lot of singing in the early tours with Kiss. He sang 2 or 3 songs, and he's famous for a few of them. And I thought, that could be me, minus the cat makeup, because somebody already got that idea. But you know what I'm saying? This guy's an entertainer. It never occurred to me that Peter Criss was not considered one of the best drummers of the 70s. I thought, why wouldn't he be? Listen to these songs. Have you heard Black Diamond? Come on. Have you heard 100,000 Years? Have you heard Detroit Rock City is the album's? Have you heard Making Love? You heard that with role he does? I kept thinking, why isn't this guy thought of and he's also singing and playing? And anywho, it took me a while of getting, you talked about your snobby friends and getting together over, cappuccinos, and I'm not really friends, but what do you think of that record? And I'd have drummer people.
Yeah, I went to a working class high school. There was no cappuccinos there.
Your Diet Coke and whatever it was you had. But I was persuaded by people who were smarter than I am, I guess, that, oh, Peter Criss isn't any good. He's just a, he's a show off. He's got, he's with the biggest band in the world because they have explosions and because they have cool personas, but he's not that great. And I was one of those rare defenders going, I don't know. I think this guy is all right. And when you isolate some of his stuff, Theodore, I think you would find I'm not just making that up.
No. And I'm thinking of a song, Detroit Rock City, which I do have the isolated tracks on. So let me play a little bit of this. And you got to know that he plays this beat throughout the entire song. There are a couple stop down, a couple fills, sections, but nothing long term, right? I mean, this thing is driving the song through 98% of it. So here's Peter Criss from Detroit Rock City. There it is. Peter Criss.
See, do you hear Well, you don't hear the ghost beat where he is doing triplets, but he's laying off on every other one as the song is going through. And that's giving it that propulsion that, and again, if he's not on a click track, then he's got to deserve more credit because he is in the pocket that whole time. And the live version of that song sounds pretty consistent with what you hear in the studio. So I hate to be, a Peter Criss apologist, but there's some good work he did that's solid as any other drummer in the 70s or 80s was doing.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think that when I got excited about Peter Criss's drumming was from Kiss Alive and when he did his drum solo on like 100,000 Years.
And I would point out that Peter Criss, like a lot of drummers from the 70s, he was born in the 40s and he came up as a jazz drummer. Like no matter what you thought of his skill set, he didn't grow up listening to, Deep Purple or whatever. He was, listening to Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa and, orchestral music where the drummer was swinging. And I think if you listen to anything Peter Criss has said about his own drum style over the years, he talks about, I play with feel. Of course, he's got a Brooklyn accent that's very difficult to understand, but if you can decipher it, he talks about playing with feel, playing like the jazz greats he loved. He loved Frank Sinatra and Frank Sinatra's orchestra. That was one of his favorite, drummers to listen to. And he does, again, like Ringo, some of these Kiss songs, which you can just disregard if you want, but if you listen to a lot of them, those aren't just straight 4/4 beats. He's doing some interesting weird, the stuff he does in the studio version of God of Thunder. He does these snare rolls that have no business being in there. They're just weird, they're offbeat, and somehow Bob Ezrin, who produced that record, went, hey, it's weird, let's keep it. Chris, you can stay in the band. Okay. Well, thank you, Bob.
The permutations of Kiss when Peter Criss eventually left the band or was forced out, whichever.
Yeah.
And
Whoever you want to believe.
they brought in other drummers who were much more technically proficient.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like they lost something when Peter Criss departed?
They lost their footing in more ways than just Peter being gone. But what I think he did for Kiss, he was the third voice. A lot of their early stuff, he sang a line and Paul sang a line, or he harmonized with Gene on stuff. So they didn't just lose their unique drum sound. If you want to just isolate that thing, they lost that other dude who could do Hard Luck Woman, who could do Beth, who could do
Black Diamond.
Right.
Black Diamond, man. That he does a great job on that.
I think Kiss lost their third voice when Peter Criss was asked to leave the band.
Mm-hmm. They lost a bit of their soul, didn't they?
Right.
I don't know why.
The cat has left the litter box. That is stupid. I apologize. Edit that out.
That was good. We'll pause there. We'll be right back with our back nine, as it were, the last few drummers we want to spotlight. Hey folks, are you tired of scrolling through playlists, desperately seeking out that authentic old school sound? Well, I'm here to tell you I found something else. The Afterworld. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's Steve Fox's Old School, 24/7 of nothing but pure, unadulterated classics. From soul to funk that moves your feet to disco to the golden age of hip-hop, you're going to get a heapin' helping of hits and deep cuts you rarely hear anywhere else. So do yourself a favor and let Steve Fox take you on an old school musical journey at stevefoxoldschool.com. It's the real deal. Steve Fox's Old School. Check it out now. stevefoxoldschool.com. All right, and that was our sponsor, Steve Fox's Old School, where you hear a lot of R&B and classic soul. And speaking of soul, here's the guy, Clyde Stubblefield, man. That dude laid down some really iconic beats for James Brown. When I was learning how to drum, one of the first songs I learned how to play was Cold Sweat, which is a great funk beat. And if you hear it just in the context of the song, you might not get the flavor of how cool it is in terms of its funkiness, but also the way in which it kind of plays a little bit with time. Let me play you the isolated track from Cold Sweat just so you can get a flavor of this Clyde Stubblefield. I use this program that strips out the various instruments. You saw that Beatles documentary. Of course you did. You saw the Beatles documentary. Well, the technology is so good now that it's those computers can isolate those sounds and pull them out into individual parts so they can isolate his vocals. This program that I use can kind of do that, not at the scale that they did for the Beatles, the documentary, but it does a serviceable job. So it just gives you an understanding about how that beat works within the context of Cold Sweat, a song that is so great. And I think in the middle, they give the drummer some, right? They just give the drummer some and he does kind of a little solo bit. It's great. It's like a 6-minute song. It'll get you dancing. It'll make you happy. It'll make you funky. So Cold Sweat.
If you
James
if you
Brown.
weren't funky enough, that will push you into a funk level. And I think it's still fascinating, Ted, that was the song that you keyed into, that you wanted. I mean, that started your sort of drum journey. We all have a funny place we start, and why that particular song speaks to you or whatnot. But I get the funky vibe because that almost forces you to like if you listen to funk and don't want to be a drummer, maybe it's just not for you, right? Because that's gonna drive your internal clock in a way with the 16th notes on a hi-hat and the push into the bass drum. Tony Thompson, right, from Chic, the same, some of that crack crack that stuff that just, I don't know, if you're not feeling that, maybe the harmonica's more of your I don't know, maybe you should look at the glockenspiel. But maybe the drums aren't your thing.
Maybe not, maybe not. But yeah, check out Cold Sweat. All right, we are going to pivot to a band that was very popular in the first half of the 80s, and that's the Go-Go's. This is a band that you wanted to spotlight. Not only the song Head Over Heels, but also the drum work that drummer Gina Shock did. So take it away with Gina. Your love for Gina.
I've got a love for Gina. Gina, if you're listening to this cast right now, just know that I'm taken, but I'm taken by you and your drumming, really. I think that being in the Go-Go's was a very big deal when they first came on the scene. And as people know the story, they're an LA-based band, but they were maybe one of the first female rock bands that played all their own instruments, not just on stage, but in the studio. And so Gina Shock's drumming was not just, it wasn't just a great live thing. It was the basis for some of the bigger hits that we all remember from the early 80s. And when I started thinking about they're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for a reason. If you know Gina Shock's name, you get extra credit, because I think a lot of times this is one of those drum situations where you just take it for granted that, oh, that Beauty and the Beat, that We Got the Beat. That's Gina Shock's, but I mean, that without her there, that song's not getting off the ground. And I highlighted when you and I talked about this cast, Head Over Heels, because I thought her work with Kathy Valentine, the bass player, formed a very, not just an LA punk pop thing. They have a groove together that I thought is sometimes underrated, because you've got Belinda's voice, which is, the voice of the Go-Go's, and some of these are catchy tunes, and that's maybe where our brains and our ears are going. But pay attention to some of the work the drummer's doing. Like the whole thing, give the drummer some. Gina, yeah.
I have an isolated clip from Head Over Heels using that same program. I did to strip out the Clyde Stubblefield drumming. So here's a bit of Head Over Heels. Working, that's for sure. She's driving that beat, yeah.
Right? Boom, ka, tang, cymbal and snare together. Then we stop and go forward. And I just she's one of those drummers, and I'm sure there's many that I'm overlooking. Listen, there was great drummers in the 70s and all female bands. The Runaways come to mind as one of the ones that was maybe one of the more popular bands. But she just seems like an example of somebody. I just don't just line them all up in a row and go, there's the Go-Go's. Isn't that cute? Look at them. Wow, just making music and everything. She is a drummer's drummer. And there are other drummers. Dave Grohl, I think, has come out and said stuff about how Gina Shock was one of his favorites. And it's like, I just feel like time to pass on the flowers. I know there's other people who are probably leaving out, but she resonated with me because of my time in high school when those records came out. I bought them. I thought they rocked. I thought it was like, you got two guitars in this band. This is like, you got the Stones set up. You got the two guitars and the lead vocal, and you know, give them their just desserts, man.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Bangles. Bangles play their own instruments. Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Did I get my bill? I didn't hear my bill.
Can I do it? I've got it.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Oh, it got muted. Oh, I saw you reach over there to give me the bell, and I thought, I didn't hear it. Hey. Well, I'm going to pivot to a guy that I think you know that I'm going to bring up at some point, and that is Neil Peart. I talked about him a little bit on a joke at the beginning of the episode. But Neil Peart's drumming is one where I would say that he's a drummer who drummed a lot from the head, meaning that he really did plan out very meticulously how he was going to play drum parts. I mean, he would just workshop this stuff to the point where once it was settled, and he was going to play it like almost like when you go to see a symphony. Everybody knows their parts and there's no improvising, right? You have your sheet music in front of you. You know exactly what you're going to play, when you're going to play it. The composition is set. Neil Peart is a compositional drummer. Towards the end of his career, he was much more willing to improvise and just see where something would take him. He found it much more thrilling to do that because I think that, you play Tom Sawyer exactly the same way every night when you're out on tour. There was this New York Times piece I remember reading about a review of one of Rush's shows. And they said, Rush has all the improvisational ability of open heart surgery. So, it's like, no, you got to go by the numbers. You have to do it this way. And that's very much what they were about. But one of the songs that I wanted to spotlight, or the song that I wanted to spotlight his drumming on, is not Tom Sawyer, which is a great song and one that most people will recognize as some excellent drumming, and there is. But it's the album that came out after Moving Pictures, which was called Signals, and the song Subdivisions. Now, you may say, oh, wait, wasn't that during their synth period where they really started to drench all the other instruments out or drown them out with a sea of synth? Yes, very much in many ways. But if you strip out all the synth stuff and you just isolate the drums, you're going to hear some really interesting drumming that has Peart doing some very complicated drum fills, and then doing some keeping time in a way that isn't always back to the same pattern. And I remember he kind of talked about his technique, and it is very mathematical. He said, so if on verse 1 you're doing X, you do your fill, and then by verse 2, do X minus 1. And then verse 3, X plus 1. And then maybe towards the end, you take X and Y and you combine them together into something. So he always had that was how he kind of composed in his head. So always kind of mixing it up, spicing it up in many ways. And it's all by design. But it got very complicated. So here's a little bit from Subdivisions, Neil Peart on drums. So that wow. Right to the end, right? That big monster fill at the end of the song.
You took the words right out of my mouth when you called him a mathematical drummer. That's how I And I'm a fan. I don't know that I've got the super fan status that you do, but I'm a big fan. Moving Pictures was, I had that cassette in my 69 VW Bug playing on a loop in 1981. I mean, that's all I heard. And I practiced Tom Sawyer over and over again, not just because I wanted to be able to technically do that roll across. And then when he runs the cymbals with the double bass kicks, but there are some things that Neil Peart does that are a little bit. Do a deeper dive into like Red Barchetta is a great example. He does a little few things with the hi-hat that are not mathematical. He throws them in it sounds like the last second. And that's how he would always keep my attention. Like, okay, I can't play as well as you, but I think I know what you're doing there. You're adding a little just because I'm just throwing this thing around because I can, because I'm that good.
Subdivisions is not, it's a favorite. It's a fan favorite. And it did really well for them in terms of MTV play and all of that. But I think that it's a song that also gets overshadowed. The drumming, that is, gets overshadowed by how forward the synth is in that song. It starts it. You can hear the guitar on there, and you can kind of hear the bass a little bit here and there. But for the most part, Neil Peart's drumming isn't that muted. It certainly serves the song, but when you isolate it out, and then when I heard just the isolated track, I was like, there is a ton that's going on the drum
Yeah.
with the drumming that got drowned out in the mix. I think maybe you'll have a better appreciation for Subdivisions if you didn't like that era of Rush, that Peart was still bringing his A game in terms of
Oh,
his drumming. Yeah. Yeah. He wasn't going all full new wave and just keeping some sort of,
where'd all your hair go? Well, it's kind of a new thing I'm doing.
well, in this picture here, you can see this picture here. He looks very new wavy.
It's beautiful. I would say like one more thing about Neil Peart, just to from my perspective, is he did a lot with a lot of drums, just from a perspective of a guy who part of what is his magic is he's not playing a Ringo Starr kit. Now, I would have loved to see that, maybe like what could Neil Peart do with 3 drums and a good attitude? This guy had drums. You thought Peter Criss had a big kit. By the time we're starting to look at what Neil Peart could do, and as he moved into their synth style stuff too, he pioneered the use of everything. That guy's got a rotating stool live the one time I saw him play, and he's rotating in 360. He's playing everything. This guy had the biggest, most expansive, complex kit. Like, you're not going to play Neil Peart's kit. You don't know how to use half of this stuff. It'd be like flying a jet. And he was one of those drummers to do that on a level that's kind of on a Mount Rushmore of rock drummers.
That same New York Times review that I referenced earlier, they said,
Mhm.
"And Neil Peart's drum kit, a nation state unto itself."
Yeah, I'm not just whistling Dixie, man.
I think this is actually a good way to segue into the last drummer we want to spotlight. And it's because it's going to kind of like make people go, wait, what? It's Karen Carpenter. Yeah, Karen
Yeah.
Carpenter. Karen Close to You Carpenter. Yeah, she was a drummer, folks. A really accomplished drummer in her own right. And I did not appreciate the level or the abilities of her until you told me, John, to go check out a couple of YouTube videos of her soloing. And I did. I found like there are a couple of them. There's some from the late 60s, where she's just sort of like jazz soloing. And then there's this thing where they took it on the road with them. It was around 1976, where there's all these drums on the stage, kits, and she runs around and she plays different rhythms and patterns and solos around there. And it's all a big show, and she's got a big smile on her face. But I was just
Right.
watching her. I was like, "Holy cow! She really brings it." And you also brought up the story, and again, for some reason, it's coming back to Led Zeppelin and Bonham so much, but
Sure.
Bonham was so pissed off at the time because Playboy magazine had listed her in a survey as the top rock drummer, and Bonham got number 2. And he was all,
You see what the Playboy magazine, the one with all the naked girls. You see what they said about my drumming. I'm number 2. Well, they're number 2 as far as I'm concerned. I don't
"You know
need
what a
that.
number 2 is? It's a piece of shit. I'm not a number 2."
I don't know. What do you think, Rocky? I just crazy. Wow. I
So I
appreciate
mean,
that you did
yeah.
that deep dive into that, Ted, because I so rarely know things you don't. Like, so really, go see this stuff. And it was fun when we had that conversation. Like, yeah, she can play like Buddy Rich. She's insane. Like, whoa, come on, Karen.
So I was thinking about it in terms of what we were talking about with Neil Peart, and that his drum kit was so huge and he was just, it would rotate. But then here's this clip, and of course I will link to it in the show notes so you can watch it yourself and do yourself a favor. Watch the whole thing because it's quite the show. And she goes from kit to kit and plays these things, and she could keep time. She's not losing anything because she's running around, literally running around the stage. And it became part of the show when the Carpenters took the show on the road. This was kind of the big thing. And Richard Carpenter would tell stories about how she was entranced by the drum by playing in her high school band, and then she really like woodshedded a lot. She taught herself all different kinds of styles and so forth. It's a shame she was never able to display that on any Carpenter songs because they were so wedded to that soft rock stuff. But I just thought, yeah, no, when Bonham said that she wouldn't last 2 minutes on a Led Zeppelin song, I'll tell you that. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. No, she would keep up and probably exceed what you could do, Bonham, because she was a very, very accomplished and more than proficient drummer. I would say she was a master of her instrument.
I agree. Shut
Yeah.
up, you fat drunk.
You
I was
call it a drunk,
that was uncalled for. That was not cool. I'm sorry.
But yeah, but it was a revelation, John. You telling
Thank
me to
you.
go and watch this thing, and I watched it, and I was all like, "Well, I stand corrected." And I guess I
Mhm.
wrote off the Carpenters like you. I mean, you
Oh,
heard them
yeah.
on radio all the time, and it's good. I mean, her
Well,
voice is very lovely. I just not into the music. Imagine had Karen not gone into the throes of an eating disorder and died at a youngish age. And she got, kept up with her drum chops and all of that. Let's
yeah.
say it's like, I don't know, 1988 or something like that, or before when she died in like the early 80s, right? It was like the early
83.
83.
83, yeah.
So let's say that you flash forward and there's a young Axl Rose coming up on stage. He's all like, welcome to the jungle, and he's all like, we're gonna bring out Karen Carpenter, and he brings her out, and she just blows everybody away with her abilities. Or Motley Crue, Tommy Lee
Yes.
like cedes his throne to her, and he's all like, number one right there, number one, and she just like it would have been kind of cool to see something
That is
like that.
fun. Yes, that would be, and I'm just having a that would be a very, very cool way to recognize her. And again, I wonder how much of that was just sort of the sexist vibe that a lot of these extremely talented female musicians, including session bassists and stuff that were played on all like the biggest hits ever, but were never recognized because that wasn't cool or whatever it was. I wonder how much of that fed into it. I know they had a successful, easy listening, you know, audience that was on that train and buying all their records, but her drumming is so good. I wonder why it was so stifled. It almost kind of, it's creepy. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, when you're that good, I mean, then go play sessions for somebody else and get, or something. It's interesting. It's like she had this buried treasure of a talent that, unless, like Ted's pointed out, you go and listen to and watch some of this stuff, you don't, typically wouldn't recognize it.
Well, this was fun. I enjoyed drummy drum talk with you.
I love just being on this podcast with you. We've been friends for so long, and we always find another lane or a fun avenue to talk about the the love we have for music, which sounds like sort of surface level simple. Everybody loves music, but to talk with somebody like you who does the deep dives and has been a fan of some of the deeper level of music and how it affects people for so long, it is always fun to have these conversations with you. I learned something. I told you this the last time I was on the podcast. I always learn something by being invited onto this platform and talking with you. It's always, it's educational and yet goofily fun and weird in a good way.
Well, Professor, you taught me well the Karen Carpenter stuff, the John Bonham meltdown over the fact that he was number two, uh,
Grow up.
and I've got a better appreciation for just in the pocket chopping wood drummers like Gina Shock or even Peter Criss, who was holding his own and doing some cool stuff and swinging it a little bit. So I think we've had a pretty diverse conversation about a diverse group of drummers. And so we gave the drummers some. We have given them more than some. We give them the whole hour. And I'm thankful to you, John, always for coming on the podcast. You're always a good sport, and it's always a fun time when we get to hang out together. I hope we can do this in the summer session. Would you like to come back? Please say yes.
The answer is a resounding yes. Bring me back again for the summer sessions. And please, for everybody who is, tell your friends about this podcast, especially if you are in need of just a little something positive, a little music in your life, maybe you thinking about things in a different way, looking at them from a different angle. This is a great podcast to just put your little headset in and tell Tom you're going to be late for the accounting meeting because you're listening to the Planet LP.
There you go. All right, folks, that's a wrap for the spring season, 2025 spring season. Back later on this summer with a handful of episodes for you here on the Planet LP podcast.